The crimson rift churned at the edge of known space, a cosmic wound of swirling red and black, an enigma that even the most advanced human instruments could not fully define. Zenith Prime stood in its shadow, a lonely sentinel among the stars, a deep space outpost meant to observe the rift's volatile gravitational tides. It had been there for over a decade, gathering data, waiting for the anomaly to unveil its secrets. Commander Elias Vance knew better than to expect easy answers. He had seen men and women drive themselves mad staring into the rift, their minds unraveling in the face of something so profoundly unknowable. He did not waste his time pondering what lay beyond it. He was a man of order, of discipline. He followed protocols, studied reports, and ensured the safety of his crew. And yet, when the alert blared through Zenith Prime, a sharp pulse of warning that shattered the station's usual monotony, something deep in his gut twisted, an inbound object. Large. Fast. Too fast. The control deck's main screen flickered as data scrolled in frantic bursts. A ship. Human. Impossible. Crimson Eclipse. Colony vessel. Lost. 133 years ago. The station fell into stunned silence. The Eclipse had been one of the last great colony ships of its time, designed to carry thousands to the outer fringes of human expansion. It had vanished after crossing into the rift, consumed by the anomaly like so many failed expeditions before it. The official reports had declared it lost, its crew mourned, its name etched into the archives of cautionary tales. And yet, here, it was unscathed, intact, broadcasting an automated distress signal from another century. Vance exchanged glances with Dr. Yara Tsing, Zenith Prime's lead xenobiologist, whose fingers hovered over her console in disbelief. Even through the screen's cold light, he could see the calculations racing behind her eyes, the scientist in her trying to rationalize the irrational. Lieutenant Marco Reyes, the station's security officer, stood rigid beside them, his expression unreadable. He had seen plenty of anomalies in his years out here, but this was something else. Something wrong. The Crimson Eclipse did not belong in this reality. The Crimson Eclipse loomed outside Zenith Prime like a specter from another time, its hull untouched by the ravages of space. No scorches from micrometeor impacts, no corrosion. From the centuries it should have drifted in the void. It was pristine, frozen in time, yet according to every scan, the crew was dead. Vance watched the data stream across his console, his mind wrestling with the impossible. Biosignatures were present but non-responsive. No movement, no vital signs. As if the ship's entire population had simply ceased to exist in any meaningful way. And yet the ship was broadcasting. A repeating signal pulsed from its comm array, an ancient distress code last used over a century ago. But the transmission contained no voices, no cries for help, just silence between the static. "We shouldn't board it," Reyes muttered, his voice unusually hushed. The man had seen combat, faced down raiders and rogue AIs, but there was something about the wrongness of this moment that unnerved even him. "This isn't a rescue mission. It's a tomb." "We need answers," Ching countered, her tone edged with scientific hunger. "A ship lost for over 100 years doesn't just reappear like this. What if the crew—" She hesitated, struggling to phrase something she barely understood. "What if they're in some kind of stasis? A temporal disruption?" Reyes scoffed. "A 100-year time bubble? You're reaching, Doc." "And yet it's here." She gestured at the screen. "Explain that." Vance silenced them with a look. Debate was useless. The Crimson Eclipse was here, and their duty, no matter how disturbing, was clear. A boarding team was assembled. The airlock shuddered as the docking clamps engaged, sealing Zenith Prime's boarding corridor against the Eclipse's outer hatch. The ship's systems, eerily intact, responded immediately, unlocking at their approach, as if expecting them. That, more than anything, made the hair on Vance's arms rise. The moment the door slid open, a wave of stillness engulfed them. Zenith Prime was a functional outpost, sterile and practical. The Crimson Eclipse was something else entirely, a frozen relic of an era long past. The corridors were dim, emergency lights flickering along the floor in dull amber hues. The air was thick, too still, as if the atmosphere itself had not stirred in over a century, and yet there was no decay, no dust, no signs of a struggle. It was as if the crew had stepped away only moments ago. Reyes took point, rifle raised, sweeping the corridors with methodical precision. The rest of the team followed, their boots making the only sound in the silence. Vance moved to the command deck first, his pulse steady but his mind racing. The captain's chair sat untouched, a station frozen in time. The logs blinked on their screens, awaiting input. He accessed the last recorded entry. The log showed routine operations, normal ship functions, no signs of distress. Then, nothing. The GI record simply stopped, not corrupted, not deleted, just ceased to exist. Tsing, working on another console, let out a sharp breath. The internal sensors. She hesitated, struggling to believe what she was seeing. They show the crew. Alive. Vance turned sharply. They're dead, Ching. We confirmed that from Zenith Prime. I know, but this ship doesn't agree. She turned the screen toward him. The ship's life support system still registered 3,041 active crew members, and then, as they watched, the numbers flickered. For a brief moment, 1,042 and then back to 3,041. The team exchanged wary glances. Something was here, something watching. The flickering number on the screen pulsed like a silent warning, an unspoken question hanging in the cold, stagnant air. 3,042. 3,041. The ship's system still recognized its crew, yet the bodies were absent, the corridors empty. Vance exhaled, his breath feeling heavier than it should. Something's wrong with this ship. Reyes tightened his grip on his rifle. Something's still here. Ching, unable to suppress her curiosity, continued sifting through the logs. The ship had recorded everything, biometric data, movement, even personal schedules of the crew, until, one day without warning, the data feed simply ceased. No emergency broadcast, no alerts, like someone had pressed pause on reality itself. And then faintly, something changed. A sound, a whisper. No, not a whisper, an echo. Down the corridor, past the open command deck. The faintest impression of voices. Murmurs that shouldn't exist in a dead ship. Vance gestured sharply to Reyes and the others, and they advanced, silent, methodical. The corridor stretched into an open atrium where artificial daylight streamed through wide observation windows. The ship's massive recreational area, once a place of life, laughter, and movement, stood in perfect stillness. Chairs remained pulled back from tables. Trays of long uneaten meals sat untouched. The place was immaculate, preserved. But the whispering was louder here. Reyes stopped, jaw clenching. We're not alone. The others felt it too. A presence. Vance motioned for the team to hold position as he moved toward the ship's central AI terminal, labeled Oracle 7, the governing intelligence of the Crimson Eclipse. The AI flickered to life, its interface humming. Softly in the dim light, a simple query: where is the crew? For a moment nothing happened. Then, the screen responded. We are here, Tsing inhaled sharply. We? A second line of text appeared. The Crimson Eclipse remains whole. We never left. The terminal flickered as if struggling against an unseen force. Help us. The whispering voices surged suddenly, overlapping, blending into a strange, discordant chorus. The team recoiled, weapons raised as the air seemed to vibrate. The lights overhead flickered wildly. The once dim corridors pulsed with something unseen, something reaching for them. And then, the ship moved. Not physically, not in space. But the very walls seemed to shift, the corridors stretching unnaturally as if space itself was rearranging. Move, now, Vance barked. They ran. The corridors weren't the same anymore. Doors led to rooms that hadn't been there seconds ago, hallways twisted into loops leading them back to where they started. And all around them the whispers grew clearer, not just echoes, not just sounds, Words. Please. Cries for help from people who were long dead, and then the first scream ripped through the air. A crew member, Hale, one of the engineers, was there 1 second, reaching for his scanner, and the next, he was gone. No trace, no struggle. Nothing but his shadow burned onto the floor where he had stood. A split second after, another voice, no longer distant, right beside them. Don't let it take you. Tsing's breath hitched. Who said that? No answer. Reyes cursed under his breath. We need to leave. Now. Vance didn't argue. They turned and sprinted back toward the airlock, the ship seeming to resist them. Doors slammed shut, corridors looped impossibly back onto themselves. The AI screen flickered again, Oracle 7 forcing itself into one last message before the systems shut down entirely. We didn't leave. We never left. Neither will you. The ship was closing in around them. The corridors twisted, looping into themselves, reshaping with each desperate step. They weren't running through the Crimson Eclipse anymore. They were running through something else, something living, shifting, pulling them deeper into its labyrinth. The air thickened, vibrating with the whispering voices. Thousands of them, overlapping, pleading, some desperate, some laughing with a tone so hollow it sent ice down their spines. Vance clenched his jaw, pulse hammering. He refused to let this ship consume them. There's a pattern, Tsing shouted, eyes darting, to the flickering lights overhead. The hallways are shifting based on... The floor rippled beneath their feet. Reyes grabbed her arm, pulling her back as a section of the corridor collapsed into empty blackness, an abyss that had not been there seconds ago. A shape moved within it, watching. Vance didn't hesitate. He pushed forward, scanning for any path that wasn't an impossible loop. He reached a control panel, fingers flying over the outdated interface. If the ship was still responding, there had to be a way out. The screen flared. You are already home. Shadow passed through the corridor ahead. A silhouette of a person, but not a person at all. It flickered as if struggling to hold form, its features indistinct, shifting through time like a faulty signal. It turned its head toward them. A voice followed, impossibly close. You should have never come here. Reyes fired. The shot tore through. The flickering figure, except there was nothing to hit. It passed through the air, leaving a delay in reality itself, as if space needed a moment to catch up. Then the thing moved, not walked, not lunged. It folded, disappearing from sight. And reappeared right beside them. Hale's voice came from it. I don't want to die. Hale was dead. Hale was gone. The lights died all at once. Tsing screamed. The ship howled with them. Vance's instincts took over. He grabbed Ching, Reyes covering, their 6, as they barreled down the corridor that hadn't been there moments ago. They were running blind now, guided only by muscle memory and sheer human defiance against the incomprehensible. The AI terminal loomed ahead, Oracle 7 screen flashing wildly in fragmented bursts. Sever the link. Escape. 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 Vance hesitated for only a second. The ship was still alive. The crew, whatever remained of them, were bound to it. Trapped in the moment of their vanishing, stretched through time, neither dead nor alive. Oracle 7 was their last connection to the Crimson Eclipse's core. If he shut it down, it might sever the link. Or it might erase them completely. Commander! Reyes shouted. The shadows in the room moved. They were out of time. Vance made his choice. He ripped the console wiring out by hand. The ship screamed. Not the engines, not the systems. The ship itself. The lights flared, blinding white. Reality itself seeming to bend as time tried to correct itself. The weight of thousands of voices collapsed in on them, a final, desperate plea. Then, silence. The ship stopped moving. Vance opened his eyes. They were standing in the airlock, behind them. The Crimson Eclipse was quiet, dark, dead. Silence clung to the air, thick and suffocating. The Crimson Eclipse, the ship that had defied time, that had whispered in voices long dead, was finally still. Vance stood in the airlock, breath coming in hard, uneven bursts. His hands trembled slightly, though whether from adrenaline or something deeper he wasn't sure. Beside him, Ching pressed a hand to the wall, her knuckles pale, her mind still trapped in what they had just endured. Reyes, ever the soldier, kept his rifle raised even as the ship remained dark and lifeless beyond the threshold. The moment they stepped through the final hatch, the doors behind them sealed shut on their own. No hiss of decompression. No warning alarms, just finality. Vance turned back, half expecting the ship to lurch, to breathe, to try one last time to pull them back inside. But the Crimson Eclipse remained motionless, orbiting Zenith Prime like the derelict it had always been meant to be. Except, it hadn't been. They had seen it, heard it. The crew had never left. And now, neither would the truth. Inside Zenith Prime's control room, the reality of their return began to set in. The station's AI immediately ran, full body scans confirming what they already knew. They were alive. Hale wasn't. The ship hadn't spared him. Or maybe it had taken him back. Vance had seen the way the shadows had swallowed him, the way the voice had spoken through him, rather than as him. And yet, the strangest thing of all was that the Crimson Eclipse's signal had stopped. No more distress beacon, no more flickering life signs. According to the station's readings, the ship was completely empty now, as if it had been that way all along. Ching sat at her terminal, replaying the footage, scanning every bit of data they had pulled. But the more she searched, the less she found. The logs they had recovered? Gone. Their mission recordings? Corrupted. Even the video feeds from their suits? Static. It was as if the Crimson Eclipse had erased itself from history. Vance leaned over the console, voice steady but firm. "Do we have anything left?" Ching's fingers tightened around the edges of the screen. Her gaze flicked to him, her usually sharp eyes clouded. "No," she admitted. "It's like it never happened." Reyes exhaled, running a hand over his face. "No proof. No evidence." His voice was flat. How convenient. Vance clenched his jaw. It had happened. He didn't need proof to know what he had seen, what he had felt. The ship hadn't just been haunted. It hadn't just been a mystery. It had been alive, and whatever had happened to its crew, whatever they had become, had almost taken them too. The others could move on. They could pretend the mission had been nothing but a failed recon, an empty vessel with no story to tell. But he knew better. The Crimson Eclipse was never meant to return, and maybe it never really had. Days passed, but the silence never left. Them Zenith Prime resumed normal operations, or at least that was the official report. The Crimson Eclipse still hung in orbit, an unspoken specter outside the station's observation deck. No one boarded it again. No one even mentioned it. Yet, even in its stillness, something about the ship felt unfinished. Vance felt it in the way the station's lights flickered when he passed certain corridors. Tsing felt it in the phantom whispers she swore she heard just before falling asleep. Reyes never spoke about it again, but the way he kept his rifle within reach even during off hours told Vance all he needed to know. They had escaped the ship, but they hadn't left it behind. Then,